Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. And if you're enjoying the interviews here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. And also, if you're interested or know any folks that would be interested in coming on chatting, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle there is Isaac R11. All right, so with that out of the way, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. We were having a great chat right in the green room before, and I'm excited. So let's just get to it. So my guest today is Jason Lengstorf. Well, I think the best way to kick off this conversation is I'd love to hear about your tech origin story. So, like, do you remember a point in time when technology came across you and this was the thing that you realized you wanted to be assimilated with the rest of your life, rest of your career, or that?
Bag groceries somewhere, and you'd get, your 2 weeks worth of work in, cash that check, pay the one bill that was outstanding, and then you would get back in the van and go back on tour. And along the way, we didn't make any money, right? So we'd get gas money. We'd maybe get enough to buy ourselves a nice meal off the dollar menu at McDonald's or something. And there was no extra to invest in the band. So we needed tour posters. We needed merch. We needed a customized MySpace page. We needed a tour blog. We needed all these things. And I didn't have any ability to hire help. So I just kind of was like, all right, I'll figure it out. So in the band, I became the de facto figure it out guy.
Sure.
And I designed our merch, and I figured out how to do tour posters, and I would coordinate with folks in different cities to get street teams together. So, I'm in a van on the highway, talking to a girl in a freshman in high school in Tucson, Arizona, asking her if I can mail her posters that she could hang up in the high school and try to get her friends to come to the show. Right. It was just this whole thing. And then I customized our MySpace page, and I built our first website, and it was all fun. I was having a blast doing the whole thing. And when the band broke up, because we got to the point where we were starting to make label shortlists and talking to our friends who were getting deals, we just realized we were never going to be a band that made money. We were going to be a band that ended up in debt, because most record deals for small time bands are more high interest loans than the thing that you might imagine a record deal is. It's not like a suitcase full of money.
Yeah.
You basically owe a label a lot of money. And we were we don't want to be in debt to be in a band. So we broke up, and I was trying to think about what I wanted to do next. And I realized that as far as running a band went, I was good at everything about being a touring musician except the music part. So I was like, well, wait, I learned all of these business skills. I can build websites, I can design things, I can negotiate for payment and coordinate things. I can manage time and schedules. Maybe I could just be a web designer. And so I kind of accidentally learned how to do these things. And then when my initial dream went up in smoke, I realized that I'd built enough crossover skill that I could move into this as a career. So it was a fortunate kind of happenstance in my case. It wasn't nobody handed me a computer when I was a kid and I was like, this is it. This is the thing.
Yeah.
It was,
Yeah.
it was very much like my backup plan, but
Yeah.
it ended up being, I don't really play music much anymore. I still really enjoy it, but I enjoy computers and technology more.
Yeah, no, and I think that and I've had a lot of conversations on the show and outside of the show about how there is this very interesting overlap between people that love music and play music and people that are technologists, right? I always say that in technology, computer science, whatever you're saying, there's a lot of art to it, creativity, being able to solve problems, be able to kind of think outside of different comfort zones, right? Do you see any similarities as a working musician, somebody who, was always trying to create new things, and the technology side of your life where, trying to build intricate applications that do blah, right? Do you see some similarities there?
So I have, yes, I do. And I think this is going to bum some people out, but the biggest parallel that I see is that people misunderstand what this is about, right? I think a lot of folks they look at musicians and they think, wow, what a creative lifestyle. Like they just sit around and noodle on a guitar all day and they
Yeah.
write these songs and everything they do is creative. And that's actually not it. Like it's a
Sure.
slog.
Yeah.
It is, you're on the road constantly. You have to do a lot of work behind the scenes that has nothing to do with the music itself. And that type of kind of the hard work that goes into enabling the creativity is very easy to gloss over. And I think the same is true in dev. I've talked to a lot of devs and I've heard a lot of stories of teams where developers have this sort of sense of, I only want to work on things that fulfill me creatively. And I think that's, like, I'm glad that code is a creative outlet for people, but it's not like, it's still a job, right? Like
Yes.
if you want to do this thing and you want it to be your source of income, you also have to do the parts that aren't fun. There's a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff that needs to get done that is challenging and that is kind of a slog. Like it's just this thing that you have to communicate to your team. You have to, write a scope. You have to update people on where your work is going. You got to write your test. You got to, groom the backlog. Like that stuff is all really important. And yes, I know that doing the maintenance on the account dashboard that's a Byzantine nightmare of legacy code isn't what you would do for fun, but you're not there for fun. You're there for a paycheck.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
I do agree with you. Like code is a very creative outlet, but I think we've, in certain aspects, we've lost the plot a little bit where because it's what we were doing for fun before it became our jobs, we treat our jobs as if they are hobbies.
Yeah.
And then we don't want to do the stuff that's not fun, even if that's the stuff that actually, puts that's what gets customers to pay. That's what puts the food on the table. Um, we are not special and unique snowflakes. We're people with a job to do, and the job needs to get done, or we all don't have jobs anymore.
I mean, I don't think that's a spicy take at all. I mean, I talk when I mentor like junior developers or folks that are wanting to get started in computer science or technology in general. I do warn people a lot about it isn't like, oh, you're gonna work on the latest greatest things all the time. You're gonna get to do all
Mhm.
this fun stuff. You're gonna make a buttload of money. Like I tell people, like you got to be a little bit of a masochist to enjoy the job, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that's outside of the fun that's how you actually earn the paycheck, right? Like, and if you figure
Right.
out a way to just make money doing the things that you love, like that's great for you. But 99% of the rest of us don't get that luxury, right? Like, and I think there is some similarities between, when you're talking about setting up like all of the like the business of running a band or being in a band, right?
Mhm.
Like that's not fun. None of that stuff is fun, especially for folks that probably, and this is not to disparage musicians, but probably aren't about business. They're more about the creative aspects of playing music, right? And I
Yeah.
think, the juxtaposition of, yeah, that it is a lot like being a developer, having to prune the backlog and chat with business analysts and figure out why my stuff isn't building. Like, no fun, right? So I
Yeah.
guess there are more similarities to being a real, like an actual musician and writing code than I thought.
Yeah, and I think that the other piece of it too is there's a lot of similarities between people who feel frustrated that they're not getting to do, like, live their dreams, is people who believe that it's all just fun and games, and
Yeah.
like if you just play hard enough, someone will discover you and do all of the boring stuff for you, and you'll just get plucked out of the crowd and get to live this charmed life. That is, for musicians, I know a lot of extraordinarily talented musicians who were anti business. Like they didn't
Sure.
want to promote their work. They didn't want to play shows because they felt like that, they were like, well, we don't want to promote because if we promote, then that, like, undermines the art of it. And it's like, okay, but if you don't promote, then no one knows that you exist,
Yeah.
and no one will ever hear you. And they were like,
Yeah.
oh, come on, man, it's about vibes. And it's like, I don't know. Yeah, I mean,
I
it
mean,
can be
it's,
about vibes, but then
yeah.
you're literally just playing for the, your circle of friends. And
Yeah.
that's fine if that's what you want. But like when you say your dream is to make music for millions, and then you're completely anti doing anything that would help you reach those millions. um, you're preventing yourself from achieving your own dream. And I think that for developers who say they want to get into the field and build these meaningful things and create these impactful solutions and change companies, change the face of technology, all this
Yeah.
stuff, and then they won't promote their work, they won't advocate internally, they won't do internal training, they won't learn how to manage up, they don't think that learning how to deal with their like, well, the technology should speak for itself. Well, cool, it should, but it won't. So are you going to do that work or not? Because if you're not going to do that work, nobody else is going to do it for you.
Mm.
You should accept, like, you can choose to accept that. I know that nobody's going to use the open source tools that I build because I don't promote them. I don't want to
Yeah.
maintain them at the level that a popular open source project needs to be maintained. So I just kind of ship them. And if somebody finds them, great. And if they don't, also great, because
Yeah.
they did what I needed them to do. And that's what I built them for.
Yep.
But if I was bitter that like nobody's using this library that I built, and I'm unwilling to put any of the work that a maintainer like, Dominic from the Tanstack query team, or any of these folks who's like, that's their job, that's
Yeah.
what they do, I'm like, it's absurd of me to expect that somebody's going to notice when I'm not doing any of the work.
Sure. I mean, man, it's so funny because I agree with everything that you're saying, but it kind of comes off as like, oh, back in my day, I walked up the hill, both ways in the snow, right? It's spot on to the effect that, like, I personally am a realist, and I recognized right when I got started in technology that I wasn't going to be like the best developer in the room. And if I was the best developer in the room, that wasn't a thing, that wasn't a positive for Isaac, right? That was a negative for the room.
Mm,
So one of the things that I recognize quickly is I like teaching, or I like giving the information that I have to other people. And maybe they'll
mhm,
be something that maybe they have the gifts that I don't, right? And I think that that's something that I always preach to folks too. It's like, just do what you find interesting and you'll end up getting your way. Like I had somebody reach out to me. They were in graduate school and they wanted to figure out how to get a job in firmware security. And I said, "Well, do you enjoy firmware security?" And they said, "No, but I've heard there's good money in it." I'm like, "Well, okay, but I imagine that job is very hard to find.
mm.
Why don't you try to find a role doing something else that you might enjoy that's a bit more mainstream? And if things work out, maybe you can get into that field later in career if it's still something that's of interest to you, right?" Um, because I think, one, there are way too many jobs out there in tech, and there's not enough people to
Mm.
fill them. Um, and two, the technology is always moving so fast that we really don't know what we want to work on. Like, I had a manager one time ask me, "Oh, what's your like 3-year plan?" And I said, uh, I mean, to be alive in 3 years. Like, I don't have like a 3-year plan, because in 3 years there's going to be some weird thing that comes out and it's going to mess all of us up, and we're going to have to relearn how to do things. And that's just the way technology is. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I think, it feels to me like there are broad strokes, and then there's like the details. And
Yep.
in broad strokes, if you can find a way to enjoy the process of coding, right?
Yep.
And like, engineering is a very broad field, because you could be doing, firmware security, or you could be doing front end focused on like CSS and JavaScript animation and like very visual interactive stuff, or you could be like back of the front end, like, building more like infrastructure and data
Yep.
management that's coming out of APIs, and more of, the like algorithmic kind of stuff. Or you could take your JavaScript to the back end and build node servers, and
Yep.
all of those things are related tangentially. And like,
Yes.
in the spirit of programming, like what I learned in ActionScript, which is one of the first programming languages I worked with, and what I learned in PHP, and what I learned in Node, they're all the same general concepts. The syntax is different, and there
Yeah.
are unique capabilities in each, but they all, they've all got loops, they've all got different
Yep.
logical operators, and so, you have this broad application. So if you can find a way to have fun that that makes you want to keep doing it. Like the trick for me at least has been learning to enjoy the process of learning.
Yes.
If I feel like I'm kind of advancing a skill set, and it can be any skill set for me, like I really love learning to cook something. I love learning how to, like, we were talking about audio before the thing started. I love geeking around with this audio gear that I've
Sure.
gotten, trying to find new ways to make it more effective. And I'm a process nerd. I'm a code nerd. Like any of this stuff is all fun for me because they're all little puzzles and I get to solve them. And that's really fun. Figuring out that I like to learn in this area, this kind of like puzzle based, novelty driven thing, I can optimize for different career moves that I never would have considered
Sure.
as being something that I would be into. But once I realized that, like, oh yeah, this is basically solving puzzles too, I was like, oh wait, that would be fun. I do like that. And so the pursuit of like not specific depth of skill, like I'm going to be the best database architect in the room, but for me the meta skill of like I'm going to be the person who has the most experience picking up new skills, or I'm going to be the one who has the strongest track record of getting dropped into an unfamiliar situation and figuring it out, whatever that thing is. Right, like for me, that's allowed me to build enough of a frame of reference of like I bring uniquely to the table the quality of like I've done a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And if you bring me into your team, I'm not going to be the best engineer or the best product manager or the best salesperson on your team, but I've done all three of those jobs, and so I'm going to give you a really well-rounded strategy that helps serve all of those goals, as opposed to somebody who's kind of they've only ever done back end, so they focus on the strengths of the back end architecture with no awareness of how it affects the product, how it affects the front end, how it affects the sales motion, whatever that thing is. So it's I don't know. I mean, I'm off on a little bit of a tangent here, I think,
I love it.
I think for me at least, I think the specifics of what you're learning matter less than starting to recognize the patterns in how you learn and like where you offer the most value. And I think that starts to really give people an advantage when they start to understand not like what is my like ultra concrete, narrow technical skill set, but rather what is my broad offering in terms of my unique worldview, my unique blend of experiences that would help me augment this team.
No, I mean, I think everything that you said makes tons of sense. Especially you said a couple of things, and I just want to peel them out, maybe have some more conversation around that. Like the idea of having fun with what you're doing, right? Like that's very, very important. And you mentioned one of the things that you enjoy is like the act of actual learning, which I think is really, really hard to navigate, right? Because one, we don't get enough time in technology in general to like learn, right? We're asked to do the work. Maybe we get training ever since the last 2 years because of the pandemic, COVID, whatever you ever want to call it. Like the ability to go out and learn at shows or at events is not as frequent. You do it at home. No one is going to be able to say, hey, I'm going to log in to and watch YouTube videos all day for, no boss is going to be okay with that, right? I think, but the second thing that you said, which is very interesting, is like the jack of all trades, master of none sort of conversation, right? Which is, to me, it's very, I don't want to say triggering, but it piques my interest a lot because you were around in tech when the idea of like the full stack developer became a thing, right? Where it's like, hey, you're not like an expert in CSS, you're not like an expert in Angular, you're not like an expert in database queries, but you can do a little bit of all of them, so you're a full stack developer. And that as more and more stacks came out and became more important, the idea of a full stack developer became almost impossible, right? I'd love to kind of get your thoughts as like, I agree that having a breadth of knowledge is important, but at some point the breadth needs to stop, right? Like I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on that.
So this is I had a really good conversation with the Front End Happy Hour podcast crew about this idea of specialization versus generalization.
Yes.
And so that quote, the jack of all trades and master of none, the next line in that aphorism is jack of all trades, master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is depending on what you're trying to accomplish, like what stage is your business at? What are you trying to do? What is your goal at the moment? Oftentimes for a early stage startup, an ultra specialist is a really bad call
Sure.
because you don't know enough about what you're building, why you're building it, to bring in a world-class expert on like database scale, for example. Um,
Sure.
Unless your company is like Planet Scale, where their whole
Yeah.
thing is database scaling.
Yep.
But the idea that early on somebody who's a generalist can come in and have a more holistic view. You've hired one person who can get you 80% of the way there, and will you have to clean up some of their mess later? Yeah, 100%.
Yes.
That's
Of
what
course.
specialists are for. But if you maybe couldn't afford to go out and hire and train 10 specialists, but one generalist with the right Venn diagram of experience can
Mhm.
get you started and help you validate product market fit. You can validate whether or not the general idea works, and then once you've proven it, you've got adoption is starting, or whatever flywheel you're trying to get turning is starting to turn, then you either thank the generalist and send them on their way, or you reduce their scope and you bring in specialists to start taking things off their plate and start refining the pieces that you know work.
Yes.
Um, so this is something that I think is like I always get into conversations like these, and I feel like sometimes they get set up as very black and white. Like, a generalist is bad for companies because X, a specialist is bad for companies because Y, and depending on what time in a company's life cycle you ask that question, I think the answer is different.
Mhm.
And so, my heuristic around this has kind of become like early in an idea, you want generalists because you want somebody who's going to say, well, yeah, but I have know a lot about product. And because of what I've seen with, these aspects of building products, we probably want to try these things in the engineering first. And I've done enough in the engineering realm of this thing we're building that I can prototype it. And
Sure.
I'll get us something that we can ship to real users, and they'll try it and they'll tell us what they like and don't like. And then that'll give us enough validation to be confident in investing real, like full-time specialists in building out the thing. And then as your company is more mature, you're going to be doing less like net new stuff. I think you'll find, if you look at companies like, an IBM, for example, there are pockets of R&D, but most of what's happening in the company is there are very profitable, very mature products that need to keep running and incrementally improving.
Yes.
And so hiring a generalist into that general, you bring a generalist into that product, and they're going to come in and be like, well, this is boring, I don't want to be here.
Sure. Yeah.
But you bring a specialist in and say, hey, build me a whole product, they're like, no. They're not going
Yeah.
to do that. So finding the right blend of skills and the right focus on generalization or specialization, depending on what you're trying to build, I think is really important. And yeah, even if you do have somebody who you would call a generalist, how far can somebody be a generalist before what they would consider to be a little bit of knowledge is more like just has dabbled in?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I would say I am a web generalist. If you drop me into just about any web project, as long as it's written in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I can find my way
Yep.
around.
Yep.
If you drop me into a Rust project, I have used Rust before, but I'm not useful at
Yeah.
it. And I could say the same for databases. I have done the 101 level of database architecture where, I know enough that if you tell me I need to go set up a SQL database, I can do that. I need to set up a document store. Sure, I can do
Yeah.
that. Am I going to do a good job? Almost certainly not.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's perfectly phrased too. Like I think one of the things that's very, very, like you mentioned Rust, right? Like I make this joke that I've learned how to program in Go 15 times, right? Like
Yes.
because it's just my brain, like I'll learn it and I'll in my view, feel like I'm somewhat competent, and then I won't
Mm,
do it for a few months because I don't use Go for my day job, and I literally have to just sit there on the Go docs, like, okay, like how do I do this? How do I catch unhandled exceptions? How do I like all of that? Like
mm-hmm.
it's just in one ear and out the other, right?
Right.
Um, and I think because of the fact we have so many tools now, not and what I mean, not just technologies, but also tools to make the technology accessible, it makes it even more challenging, right? Because like I remember it used to be like, what browser do you use? And then it became, what
Mm.
JavaScript framework do you use? Now it's like, oh, like do you use Kubernetes or are you a simpleton, right? Like like but all right, take a break. But I think the biggest thing, it's about figuring out what tools are going to bring you the most joy too. Like,
Mm.
and to kind of jump to another little topic that you brought up, like this, the generalist versus specialist thing. It's not just in like the tech sides of the business too. Like
Mm.
I have a marketing background. I used to be in product marketing. You, to an extent, have had a marketing background, you in
Mm-hmm.
developer marketing, developer experience, right? And you said something that's very, very interesting. Depending on the maturity of a company, you might want somebody that like has worked in many areas of marketing or sales, or you want
Mm-hmm.
someone that has experience doing all these different tenets of a job. Where else, if you work for, big company X, like you need a very specialized position, specialized set of skills for this particular thing. You need to be very good in
Mm-hmm.
demand gen or regional marketing or whatever it is, right? So it's something that's really important too. It's like it's not just tech where like you have this
Mm-hmm.
generalist versus specialist all across the business.
Yeah, and I think something that I've noticed as I've worked with different tech companies in both like full time employment and consulting is there's almost like milestones that a business will hit where, for example, in one company, I saw an executive who was fantastic from like 15 employees up to 100 employees. And then once they crossed 100 employees, that same executive was starting to struggle.
Mm.
And so that exec left to go join a company that was like a 20-person
Yeah.
startup.
Yeah.
And they hired somebody who was more specialized in that like next stage of growth, like the 100 to 500 employees size. Um, Vice versa, I saw an executive come from one of the big companies, like 5,000 plus employees. They came to a 150-person startup and they ground everything to a halt
Sure.
because they were trying to do things at the 5,000-person
Yeah.
scale.
Because
And
they
there
have
weren't
process,
enough
right?
people. Yeah, and there weren't enough
Yeah.
people to do the process. So they were just like, it was like a dishwasher going with nothing. Like, you just like put a fork in a dishwasher. It's like they had so many things that they needed to be done, and everybody was trying to do their things,
Yeah.
but the company wasn't big enough to support that scale yet. So it just ground everything to a full halt, because we had the wrong scale of executive for the scale of
Yeah.
company. And so I think the thing that's interesting is this is not a two-dimensional gradient, right? It's not just like experienced executive plus company equals success, right? It's
Sure.
very much like it's a whole 4D thing, because what areas of skill do the founders have? What size has the company scaled to? How much confidence do they have about their engineering department, their marketing department, their product, sales, support, all those things? Who have they already hired? What's their blend of skills? And then what is this executive's experience of like scaling from X to Y? What overlap do they have? Are they filling the right gaps on the team, or are they like bringing in redundancies that are going to cause tension because you've got three people who have a lot of product experience and nobody who's got deep sales experience.
Yeah.
You've just got like light sales experience because this person is a sales and marketing exec or something, right? And so you've got it's interesting to me because I think the nature of startups sort of removes this idea that you should stay at a company for a long time.
Yeah.
because you almost develop like a slice of company life cycle that is your
Mm,
specialty.
sure.
I, for example, am very good at small companies.
Sure.
Once the company gets above 75, I'm okay. Once it gets above 250, I fall apart.
Mm,
I just don't work well at companies above about 250. So I want to work with the companies that are around 15 to 50 because that's where, in my opinion, that's where I fit best.
yeah.
Because that's where my experience is.
Yeah.
That's where the processes fit my temperament. Like I just know that about myself now, so I'm kind of aiming for that. And if I help a company get to 50 or 150, I'll probably start looking for like what's the next company at 15 to 20 that I could go join and try to bring them to that point again. And I've seen a lot of people do this, like designers who were great when the design team was one or two people,
Yeah.
who really struggled when it was 10, or vice versa. People who came in and they were used to having a big team and they just were really like overwhelmed by the amount of things they had to do when they were one of two people on the team. Um, so I think it's a good like an exercise as a hiring, like whoever the hiring manager is, to think about, what do we need? What phase are we in right now? And where do we want to get to? And are we hiring somebody who's bringing in the right blend of skills and the right experience of scale? And then as somebody who's applying for a job, also like, how big is this company? How big was the last company you were at? Think about all the companies you've worked at where you were happy, all the ones where you were unhappy. What scale were they at? What were they, what were they asking you to do? So that you make sure that you're lining up not just to the skill set, but also to the life cycle of the business, and make sure that it lines up with your skills and strengths and interests.
Yeah. You said something, and I had a question, and you kind of answered it already. And the question was like, are certain personalities better fits for smaller organizations versus larger organizations, right? And I think you answered
Mm-hmm.
it to an extent, at least for you. But do you have a belief that, and the reason why I ask this is, if somebody new joins your team, like the first thing that you're gonna do is like before you meet them, you're like, okay, let's see if let's check out their LinkedIn, see where they've worked. Maybe we've worked
Mm-hmm.
somewhere similar before. Like maybe we have colleagues. Like just try to build like some knowledge of what that person brings to a company. And if you see like a lot of different employers, right, and they're all you've never
Mm-hmm.
heard of, right? It's like they're a lot of startups, right? My question is do you think that there's a certain personality type or a certain kind of individual that I don't want to say only should work at startups, but is probably going to be more successful working at startups? And you kind of mentioned that you're one of those, but do you think that that's something that's more common in the industry? Or do you
Um,
think that it's something that's a bit more, Jason, you're like a very special snowflake and you're the only person that has this sort of thing?
no, I think so. I think there are working styles and appetites for chaos.
Mm,
Um, and those blend. So I don't necessarily think it's a personality type so much as it is a, like if you were to look at people on the introvert extrovert spectrum, like that's not
sure.
their whole personality, but it's
Yeah.
it's influencing factor. So I would say this is kind of the same thing where there's a this the what is it an analogy that Simon Wardley uses to describe types of workers, and it's um, pioneers, town settlers, and city planners. And the idea is that like somebody who's a pioneer is somebody who wants to explore new areas. So they thrive on ambiguity, lack of structure, just general chaos. They want to be in a um, exploratory capacity. Someone who's a town settler is looking for something that has been proven to be possible but isn't mature yet. They want to take something that's like, okay, we know that in the using the pioneer town settler
Sure.
analogy, like this plot of land is workable, and
Yeah.
we want to turn it into a place we can live.
Yeah.
And so this would be, somebody who once the R&D department has prototyped something, the person who loves getting that prototype, tearing it down, and then building it again the right way, and
Hmm.
proving out this is not just like a good idea, but this is a scalable, sustainable idea. And then on the city planner side, that's somebody who wants to like take a big service and make it perfect.
Yeah.
So SREs, city planner mindset is great for somebody who's an SRE, because what they want to do is start looking at a functioning system and streamline every piece of it and try to make it as clean and bulletproof and just functional as they possibly can. And so I think that depending on which department you're in, like there are R&D departments, the office of the CTO at a giant
Sure.
company where a pioneer is a great fit. I would say I'm more of the pioneer mindset. Like I love chaos. I love it when somebody's like, hey, we've got this like poorly defined idea. Do you want to work on it? And I'm like, hell yeah, I do. Like, let's go.
Yeah.
Whereas I know some of my colleagues, like if I get into full blown, like ambiguous idea mode, I can see them getting anxious because it's just like, I'm a fire hose of ideas and they're freaking out because they're like, am I like, do we have to build all of that? Like,
yeah. Yeah. No, I totally, I've been in rooms. Yeah. And I'm not to say that I'm similar to that, but like I do at some ventures walk outside the box a little bit with ideas, and you can just read a room and some people will just be like, oh no, like, cause the people like, I mean, I don't have to go and build the thing. I could just come up with the idea for the thing sometimes. And the people that are building the thing is like, no, please stop talking. Please stop talking. Right.
Right.
And I think that that's really interesting. Going back to the conversation about like size of business. Right. And the reason why I want to ask this question is like, so you've worked predominantly, like you said, in smaller organizations, right? And now you work at the smallest organization possible, right? So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts. We don't need to go through like a career progression or anything like that, but at one point in time, like, did you worked at a company and then you hung out with company and watched it grow a few times, and then you moved on to something a bit smaller, and used the number 250, right? Was that just kind of was it because there was some operational debt that gets incurred based on the size of people that you got uncomfortable with, or is it just you felt like you didn't have I don't want to quote like some philosopher, but like you started to feel kind of like strapped, or you started to feel a little bit of chains put on you as pertains to creative freedom?
No, okay. So for me, there are a few factors. I think the biggest factor is there's Dunbar's number, which I don't remember what the exact number is. I think it's around 225 or 250. And it's this idea that there is a number of people that you can know.
Yeah.
And once you cross that number, you're not physically capable of knowing everybody anymore.
Sure.
And if you've crossed Dunbar's number, then it means you are necessarily working with people in a company that you may never meet, you never speak to, never interact with. And that's weird, right? Like when you go to an all hands meeting, like the team offsite where they get the whole company together, when it's 50 people, you're like all around one really long dinner table in a private room at a restaurant, and you actually talk to all your coworkers. And, when you have the team sessions, you can all be crowded around one whiteboard, and it's not efficient with 50 people, but you can do it.
Yeah.
With 250 people, you absolutely 100% cannot do it. You have to break into smaller groups. You have to work in like kind of disjointed areas, or you have to have very clear separation of ownership where like there is a product organization, and in the product organization, there are sub organizations that own different aspects of the business. And that's very necessary. Right. And for me, I don't mind that, but what I prefer is that smaller, like I want to be at a company of 20, because at 20 people, you can get the whole company on a call and say, this is the big idea. What risks are there?
Yeah.
And then, support says, well, what about this? And product says, what about this? And everybody just kind of says like their piece, and then they all kind of weigh in, and then you go, great, we're going to break it down. We're going to give you the big idea. And then each of you is going to turn that into a list of like a scope for yourself. And you can have those discussions and make these rapid decisions and be pretty agile. The bigger the company gets, the more likely it is that those decisions get made by smaller and smaller, like in groups, like the leadership team or the product team kind of works in an insular way. And then the roadmap falls out and engineering just catches it and has to deal with it. So that's depending on how the organization scales itself, you'll see either waterfall emerges or very like insular siloed kind of organizational separation starts to emerge, or things just get slow because you have like the leadership team has ideas, and then those ideas have to be properly socialized with everybody, and the feedback period needs to be open, and then it has to come back up, and the adjustments need to get made, and then that has to be disseminated through the middle management chain, and you have to have like, you know what I mean? Like
you make it sound very exhausting.
Well,
I mean,
I don't know that it's,
yeah,
for me, it is
yeah,
exhausting.
yeah,
For other folks though, like this
yeah,
is what makes them confident in their company.
sure,
If you work at a company that has these communication challenges, not challenges, communication channels and checks and balances, and they want approval processes, and they want someone to be making sure that like, hey, did you run this by the docs team before you put this on the backlog? And and then you wait a week while the docs team has a chance to review, and that's okay. You know that everything happens on a 6 to 8 month cycle. That is very like comforting, I think, and confidence inducing when a company runs on that cycle to somebody who's in the town settler to city planner on the spectrum. They want to know that the roadmap's not going to get ripped up tomorrow. They want to be confident that they're not going to put 3 weeks of work on something and then find out that nobody cares about it anymore because leadership changed their mind. So it's again sort of on the like, where do you fit in best? My strength is rallying a small group of people to go and build something quickly.
yeah,
And so I would get put on, like at Netlify, for example, I'd get put on a special project where I would pitch, hey, we've got some like UI drift between our app, our docs, and our main marketing site. I want to bring together the key stakeholders across all three of those properties and do, we called it Web Cohesion Week. And so we brought like 18 people together and we did a week-long hackathon to make the app, the docs, and the website all look the same. So we did like, we've got a group of shared variables put together, got some shared components moved between things, and the teams were all kind of consulting with each other. We had the right designers in the room, the right front-end engineers in the room, the product folks in the room. And that all led to, a big win in a short period of time. That's my strength. But the bigger Netlify gets, the more stressful it is when me, the VP of developer experience, why was I doing a thing that was touching product and design and engineering, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense kind of, but it also stresses out those other, like I got to collaborate with those leaders and make sure that I'm not blowing up their plans. And, if you're at a smaller company, you can have those ideas and land on a plan faster because there are fewer balls in the air.
Sure.
And so I want to be careful about saying like one is better than the other.
Yeah, no. I already get you already are saying that your way is the best, which is fine. That's totally cool. No, but I think you say something that's, I mean, this is all about, again, back to what we were saying earlier, like what brings you joy? Like, not to quote the silly thing on Netflix, but like what brings you joy, right? Like, if you can go to work every day and like, I tell people this too, like if your first thought is when you like, it's Monday and you have to start work, your first thought shouldn't be, I got to go to work today. Right? Like if that is your first initial feeling, like, sure, you could be not wanting to go to work on Monday. That's totally respectable. But like, you can't be like complacent about it or bummed out by it, because that means you're missing out on some other opportunity that might bring you more joy.
Yeah. So, I think if you're dreading work, right? Like that's a bad sign.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I would love to kind of, we got about 15 minutes left. I wanted to kind of transition into what you're doing right now, which I think is really, really interesting. It's like, you've done this, you've done this, the generalist sort of thing, wearing many hats, and then you kind of move into this developer experience work where, is it marketing? Is it DevRel? Is it product, right? I think you kind of mentioned the answer is yes to all of them, right? And now, like, you've kind of transitioned into a completely different sort of role. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I, as of I guess officially as of December, but really like practically as of this month, January, I have gone full time on Learn with Jason, and the intention is it's sort of like three areas of focus that all kind of service each other in what hopefully becomes a virtuous cycle. So I make the show. So every week I do a longer solo show on Tuesdays, and then I have a show with a guest on Thursdays where I learn something new in 90 minutes. So they come on as an expert, they teach me something they know, and we kind of build it from scratch. That is just a steady content production pipeline. I've got some ideas on ways to do a little bit more with it, but we'll kind of see how it goes. That show works. I don't want to break it. The second piece of it is I'm doing contracts with companies, mostly in the early stage, where I want to work with them on their dev relations strategy. And what I mostly want to do with that strategy is talk about where they're applying their energy and help them do it in ways that are going to get an actual connection with the community, an actual response from the developers who they want to reach. Instead of because I think a lot of the things that used to work just don't work as well. Like, conferences are very different today than they were in 2018, and the ROI is not the same anymore, right? So it's not that you should never do a conference, but I think a lot of companies put all of their eggs in the conference basket for DevRel, and I don't think that works anymore. So I want to talk about what else people could do and help them kind of move that way. And then the third prong of it is I want to actually put together education for companies to put better DevRel together without having to hire me as a consultant. So this is what I want to do is I'm kind of doing the DevRel in Learn with Jason. I'm helping companies directly as a consultant, and then I'm trying to put together education so the companies can self-serve better DevRel through the educational arm.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's fascinating about this, and just for some folks, for context, we were talking about this a little bit before we got started about like the idea of consulting developer experience or consulting developer engagement or developer marketing or
Right.
DevRel, whatever you want to call it, right? And you had a pretty hot take, and I don't disagree with it at all. I would love for you to kind of, talk about it a little bit more, flesh it out a little bit, because you think that DevRel is going to change in some capacity in the next few years.
Yes, I think so. The challenge with DevRel is that while effective DevRels are not celebrities, there is a bit of a celebrity treatment that happens with them. And the rules change a little bit when you become well known in a space.
Sure.
And so what I think companies have been doing is they've been trying to hire full time these people who are, well known in the community.
Sure.
And the upside to that is you get a lot of noise when they partner with either on your team. They chose you. You're the company that out of all the companies they could work for, they wanted to work for you. But I have never seen a well-known DevRel stay at a company for longer than 2 years. Like it just it's almost unheard of. And there are exceptions to that rule. And if I can toot my own horn and say that I'm one of those DevRels,
Sure.
I stayed at Netlify for 3 years,
Yep.
right? But it's
Yep.
still like that relationship ended. And part of what happens when a DevRel, like somebody who's well known, like if Cassidy Williams works at your company and then she leaves, you have to have a whole strategy around how do we handle the potential negative perception of this well-known person leaving our company.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that people know that it's because they're moving on to their next thing and not because we're doing something bad, right? And so I think the shift is going to move more toward like endorsement, the way that Nike doesn't employ Serena Williams. They get her to endorse Nike, and they pay her, they pay her royalties to make Nike her official shoe.
Sure.
And I think that for full-time content creators, the folks who are really out there, it's very clear who is in it because they want to make content and it's kind of like their brand, versus who's not the case for. And for folks who want it to be like, they want their brand, they want to be full-time content creators, it makes way more sense for companies to use an endorsement model where
Sure.
you partner with
Yeah.
those folks and then go out and like create some content with a time boxed relationship that you can always extend. You can always, negotiate another year. But the benefit then is you get all the upside of having worked with that person, and they're endorsing your company and they're teaching people how to use it and they're showing it off, but none of the downside of like, now they're going to quit and go do something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
And you have to do like PR to to figure out how to control the fallout of somebody exiting your company. So I suspect that that's going to be a change as time goes on.
Yeah, it's that's quite interesting because it reminds me of a conversation that I had on this show. I don't even know when it was, probably over a year ago now, when I had Kat Cosgrove, and I don't know if you know Kat,
Mm-hmm.
because she was talking about, being a developer advocate, and her thought process was very much, you're paying me to talk about your stuff. You're
Right.
paying me to speak about your stuff. And if some other company comes around and wants to pay me more to talk about their stuff, I will go and do that. And I think
Right.
that, like, I mean, I completely respect that. And I think that there's something to say is like, the people that are good in DevRel, the folks that are good in DevRel, like, you're right. Like, they kind of hop from company to company. And there's probably a million reasons why that's the case. Maybe it's, just opportunities. Maybe it's they're not interested in the work anymore. Maybe they want to try something new. But the number one thing, like you said, is that if the immediate thought when I see that somebody has left said company that I follow on Twitter, I say, oh, I wonder what happened. That's
Right.
like the first thing that I think. And that's not the way to think about things, right? So,
Well, especially when you like, if you look at the way that this industry works specifically for DevRel, right?
mhm,
You look at somebody like I talked about Cassidy earlier, but like if you look at Cassidy's work, she's so prolific and so effective that I that she's got an offer every day in her inbox to do
sure,
something that would be amazing.
sure.
And so it is such a gamble to go all in when like, as soon as you can't compete with the the wild, like somebody in crypto who just got their ridiculous valuation and funding, who can
Yeah,
then go and throw around $300,000 a year salaries, right? How many times are you going to hear that you could double, triple, whatever your
yeah,
salary before you start going, oh, maybe I could,
yeah,
maybe I should take that job, right?
yeah,
Or like, we're all friends. Like, everybody in DevRel knows each other, and
sure,
like,
sure.
one of them will go get a new job and they'll love it, and they'll say, man, you should come over here. Like, this is really fun. We're having a lot
Yeah,
of fun. And I'm like, I want to work with my friends. It has
yeah,
nothing to do with the company.
yeah.
Absolutely nothing to do with the company. It's just like, like when I left Netlify, I love that company.
Hmm.
I still use it all the time. I talk about it all the time. I just had an opportunity to do something that I've wanted to do for a long time, which
Yeah,
is go all in on Learn with Jason. So, but I'm sure there was probably speculation like, oh, I wonder what happened. Why did Jason leave? And it's like, sure, there were things that I would have changed about Netlify, but
hmm,
like, for me, that's still the best employment
yeah,
job I've ever had. And if I didn't have this Learn with Jason opportunity, I'd still be there. It just, I'm lucky in that I have a lot of opportunities out there, and one that I've wanted for a long time. The stars aligned and I'm able to take this bet on myself. And for me, it kind of lets me have my cake and eat it too, because, for example, I just took a contract with Astro. Now, Astro shouldn't hire me. It wouldn't be a good investment on their part
sure.
because I'm expensive, and most likely in 2 years I would move on to something else.
Yeah,
But if they contract me, it costs them less than hiring me full time. I get to go work with this company that I really like. I think it's cool tech and it's fun to talk about, and we get to like have this sort of relationship of collaborating and building cool stuff, and I'll help them with strategy, and we'll come up with some good ideas that some of them we'll do together, and some of them they'll have on a backlog for in the future. And everybody wins, right? And nobody's going to speculate on like, why did Jason leave Astro? Because I never joined. We're teaming up to do some stuff
yeah,
together, and when that contract runs out, like, yeah, that was that was always the plan.
yeah,
So I think it's a little bit about when you have people who are highly visible, you don't want to, like, what's it gonna look like when John Myers leaves Supabase? Because there's no way he stays there forever.
Yeah. I mean,
And
you can start naming off like some people that you're like, oh man, if they left said company, it would be a kind of a big deal. Like I just can list off like 10 of them, right? Like,
right.
and that's not a good thing to be like, oh, if that person left that company would be, I don't want to say in shambles, but there's definitely like, oh, maybe that's not a good place to work. Maybe they're not doing the right thing. Yeah.
And that's exactly the thing, right? Like if we found out tomorrow that some of the folks that we follow right now were leaving their companies, depending on how they make the announcement,
Sure.
we're either going to walk away thinking like, oh boy, something must be going on over there, or we're going to be, like, there's going to be speculation, because even if it's for a great reason, like I've had folks that I know who got offered like 150% of their salary and a level bump to go do DevRel at a new company.
Yep.
And there was no reason for them not to take it. It was such a great opportunity. The company they were at wasn't in a position to, there wasn't a role open that was equivalent to the one that they'd been offered, and it helped them on their career. So they got everything that they wanted out of the job that they had. They helped the company they were with quite a bit while they were there. And then they got a new opportunity out of the deal and they took it. And public perception, though, you can't say like, oh yeah, so-and-so just doubled their salary, like, because that's, now the company would have to like kind of share very private details that don't make sense to share, and kind of open up this whole other can of worms about where people start like judging whether or not that person deserves more money. And you don't want to ever make somebody that subject of discussion. But at the same time, like, you're stoked for him. Like,
Yeah.
of course, that's a good idea. Yeah, you're doing great. I'm so happy for you. You have to take that job. And then you have to go do this sort of damage control of like, no, but we're leaving on good terms, and everybody still likes them. And hey, can you do a little bit of stuff with us after the fact to show that we're still friends? And it gets into this very complicated dance that I don't think is necessary anymore. Like, we've figured out what DevRel is. And there are a lot of disciplines inside of DevRel that aren't what I'm talking about. The solo content creator types that are very much like big personalities, the Kelsey Hightowers out there. But for the folks who are like content personalities, like they have made it their job to be somebody who makes content, and they've built up a following based on who they are. Because we all follow companies that have a great content machine, and there's somebody making that content, but we don't know who it is. Because it's the company has built that machine, and those people want to work for a company. But for somebody who wants them to be the source of the content, then the companies are borrowing their reputation, and so it's just better to do that through an endorsement model, I think, because it sets everybody up for success instead of creating complexity when the relationship inevitably evolves.
Yeah, and I think, we're about to wrap up here, but what you're saying is not like it already exists to an extent. We just don't call it that. Like influencer marketing is still like a very big part of marketing, right? Where like, hey, there's some social media personality that I subscribe to. Let's pay them some money to talk about our product. That happens constantly, right? Happens across businesses, right? Because I think you hit the nail on the head. It is much easier to just write somebody a check and own the content, and they own the content and you just get leads or whatever it is, than it is to onboard a person, get them into your culture, get them into your business, hit them up with benefits, all that stuff. It's much easier to write a check. It is. It's substantially easier.
And if the reason you're hiring them is because you like their content, then it's so much easier to just say, can you make what you're making, but about us, than to say, do you want to join our team? And now we've got to kind of build out, like, how do you fit into our team? What can you build that's not what you've been doing, but like in addition, it just adds complexity. And it's kind of like, that old adage of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you've got somebody that you want to work with and they're doing a great job on their own, don't try to change their stuff. Just financially motivate them to bring you into what they're doing. And a lot of creators do that. Like if you look at all your favorite YouTubers, all of them are taking money to make content about the things that they talk about.
Sure.
It doesn't decrease the quality of the thing. It just
No,
helps
not at all.
them prioritize what to play with next.
Yeah, and it's a mutually agreeable contract, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I get views, so I get not only do I get to build my brand, I probably get monetization, I also get paid by you. And then company who's doing it, we're getting visibility, awareness to potentially some areas of technology that we don't have access to. Like, hey, if I go and
Right.
pay this influencer, I immediately have access to their network, their audience,
Right.
which is
Right.
really, really valuable for a lot of companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and as we're wrapping up, I think this conversation was great. I think we could honestly keep going for a while, but I want to be mindful of the time, not just for you and me, but for the folks that are tuning in as well. I do have one last question, however, and it's a quick one. At the end of every show, I love to ask my guests if they can kind of summarize their feeling when they think about the technology space, the open source space, even in your case, maybe the developer relations space, but they only had one word to summarize that thought that they had. What would it be for you?
Optimistic.
Optimistic. That's pretty good. Sounds good to me. So, Jason, I want to thank you so much for hopping on and chatting with us. I had a blast. I hope you did too. Do you have any parting words or things you want to sign off with?
No, thank you everybody for hanging out and for listening to me ramble. I appreciate it. And please come hang out on Twitter, Twitch, wherever you want to.
Yep. And we'll be sure to put some links to some of the stuff that Jason's working on in the show notes, as well as if you're not already following him on social media, there's places to find him there as well. So I want to say again, thanks, Jason, for hopping on. Thank you for everybody tuning in. We'll see you next time on Coffee and Open Source. Take care.